Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So today I want to talk about properly formatting your manuscript. Okay, a lot of people don't talk about this. You want to talk more about what goes into pitching, the submission process, but one thing that's super important about this is making sure that your manuscript is in the best possible shape. Now, the first, I think, and easiest and probably least expensive way of figuring this out besides taking courses, going to conferences, etc., is reading a book. Going to someone's either purchasing the book, obviously the physical book, Amazon, downloading it. I won't say audio because you need to physically look at it, but at the end of the day, an actual published book will show you everything you need to know for the most part about what I'm going to talk about today. But even still, let's run through this checklist and make sure that you all are properly formatting your manuscript so that when you're sending it to the publishing professional, they don't have to spend time correcting your formatting. And this is also especially important for you guys that are self-publishing and or hiring editors and formatting people. These are some things that you can help to make the job less expensive, okay? Especially if they're charging by what they're doing, Formatting is very important. So the first thing is your standard formatting is either Times New Roman, now Calibri is another acceptable font, but you want to choose a font that's clear and easy to read. You don't want to include any swoopy fonts or anything like that unless it's a small section that you're trying to signify a card, a journal, something, that is kind of like an addition to the story, but not the entire story itself. You want to make sure that it's at least 1.5 space or double spaced, just because it's easier on the eyes instead of having all the text crunched together. That allows for some white space in between the words, and I promise you it really does help the editor or agent to read clearly, okay? Other acceptable formats, Courier New, Helvetica, again, clear, font that's easy to read, nothing that's swoopy and hard to focus on. This is also true for covers, you all, for any of you who are, self-publishing, creating your own covers. Be careful about super swoopy fonts. It may look pretty, but if you shrink that cover down small to what it would kind of look like on someone's computer or on someone's phone, which we know is very important because that's how a lot of people are buying their books. If they can't read your name or the title, 9 times out of 10, they're just going to keep scrolling. So you want to make sure that even the fonts on your covers are not, illegible, okay? Avoid including front and back matter when you are preparing your documents for review. And by front and back matter, I just mean dedication, acknowledgments, back ads. The publishers will ask for these materials once they get to the point of publication, at which point, if you have some updated stuff you want to add, they might ask you for book club questions, etc. It's nothing wrong with having these documents available, but when the publisher is reviewing your manuscript, they don't need all of that stuff. The only thing I would say to keep is if you have a table of contents, like you're writing a proposal or a nonfiction book, again, your book is broken down by some kind of table of contents, then you want to include that. But I would just suggest keeping the manuscript just focus on the book itself, and then you can include any additional materials down the line. Also, for any of you writing sci-fi, fantasy, or paranormal, you might have some kind of key or legend, that helps people to understand terms, phrases, characters. You can include that. Anything that is super pertinent to the story, include it. But again, my suggestion, obviously you guys will do as you wish, but is to kind of hold off on any additional front and back matter until it is asked of you. The next thing is, I would suggest, keeping your headers and footers clear. So you don't need like a ton of information in that header or footer. Make sure you're including your page counts, please. At the top of the page, bottom of the page, doesn't matter, should be there. And then the title of the story is fine. Your name is fine if you want to include it to make it look more like a book. And also, just in case the editor or agent likes to print out pages, or just needs a reminder, oh wait, which submission was this? It is helpful to include the title and or your name with the page count. Very helpful. Do not include your mailing address or any other personal information like your social security number or anything like that on your cover page of your project. You can include your name, you can include your email address, you can include your phone number. If you all have an agent, then actually that information besides your title and your name, the bottom right corner or left corner, whichever you decide, that should have your agent's information, their name, their agency address, if available, mailing address, the email address, and their phone number, because basically you want to allow the publishing professional the ability to contact either you or your agent if they are interested in the project. So you want to make sure that that is on the cover page of your manuscript and or proposal. Okay, and the reason I suggest not including your mailing address is because you just never know, and you don't want anyone who should not have your mailing address to have your mailing address. When you sign with the publishing professional, that is when you can give your personal information, like your mailing address, like your social security number or EIN number, okay? But for submission purposes, because you're not sure if it's an intern, if it's if it's in the slush pile, you don't know really who is reviewing your submission all the time, so you want to make sure to keep your personal information off of it. Now that we've talked about, the basic formatting stuff, let's talk about writing dialogue, okay, and overall writing style. Dialogue is probably one of the hardest things for authors to write because you want to not only make it feel real and authentic, but it really needs to move your story along. That is the purpose of dialogue. It's not just to have your characters chit-chatting, to add some words to your story. It is really to reveal things about your characters and about your plot without info dumping or without big, huge chunks of text. It is a resource to actually move your pace forward, not slow it down. So not only do you want to make sure that the actual content of your dialogue is useful and moves your story along, but please learn how to format dialogue. Indentations are really helpful for editors, especially editors who are hired to edit your book before you turn it into a publisher or self-publish, or your editor in-house, because that managing editor is going to have to format that. And again, we want your editors to focus on the content and not get caught up in formatting stuff, okay? And it can get expensive if it's not formatted properly. So every time a character says something new, it should be indented like a new paragraph, okay? If it is the character that is continuing to talk, then they will have multiple paragraphs that follow each other, and the last line of each paragraph will not have quotation marks, okay? Make sure your dialogue has the proper quotation marks. Make sure you are putting the periods, the commas, the question marks inside your quotation marks, okay? Again, the easiest way to see examples of writing proper dialogue is to read a best-selling published book in the genre that you write in. That way you can see the switch. That way you can see how many times they say he said, she said, they replied. When it's just two people talking, you may not want to say that every single time they speak, because it should be clear if your flow of conversation is going the right way, who is saying what when there's only two people talking. Now, of course, if there's more than two people talking, then you might want to say he or she or they replied to make sure that the reader can keep the conversation clear and know who's speaking when. Next thing is there's typically no full caps in dialogue or in type. Now, of course, you see people kind of break these rules all the time, but typically if you want to emphasize something, it would be in italics or signified with an exclamation point. Again, totally up to you, but typically there are not really, unless, or if the character is reading a sign or it's some note, then you might see some caps, but typically we try to avoid caps in text. You want to be careful about repetitive language, okay? Phrases that people say, movements, actions, again, a he said, she said, they said multiple times on the page, and actually multiple times on the page. And as he or they did, they make their way this way. Starting every sentence with I, if your book is in first person. These are some things that a really great editor is going to point out, but there are some things that you can think about as well, because that affects the flow of your story. If you've got a ton of repetitive words or phrases, it kind of belabors your font. It kind of slows down the pace. It gets monotonous. So be careful about repetitive language, words, phrases. Italics, again, are used to emphasize a point, but they're also used to display a thought. So if a character is thinking about something in the moment, that thought is typically italicized. Italics are also used if you're reading something, signs, also flashbacks, dreams. Sometimes, depending on how long they are, the author will include that in italics. So that's just something to consider when using italics, okay? Is there usually thoughts, memories, flashbacks, dreams, or also if the character's reading something, a text message, a street sign, that's usually when you use italics. Page breaks are really helpful when you're changing chapter. The reason I say this is because as the editor kind of jumps in and starts editing, sometimes it'll move your pages around, and then you'll end up having the end of a chapter running along with the start of a new chapter. So I would definitely recommend using page breaks when you're starting a new chapter, okay? Also, familiarize yourself, invest in Microsoft Word. I know a lot of people are using Google Docs now, and I'll explain why I don't care for Google Docs, because editing for me is really personal, I guess. And also, as I'm working through the story, I'm working through my thoughts too, which may not always be author friendly. Especially if if it's a really tough edit, requires a lot of work, that is frustrating for editors sometimes. And so I don't always want you to see certain comments until I've wrapped my mind around them and figured out what I want to say. Also, there are often times, which is why I don't communicate with authors while I'm editing, you might have an issue in the early pages that you cleared up later on. And I don't want your thoughts or feedback influencing how I'm processing this, because I'm processing it as a new person, as a new reader would. And so if I already know what's supposed to be there, how can I tell when it's not there? Also, having the authors kind of jumping in, explaining things, communicating, for me, that stumps my process. So I always encourage my authors to have access to Microsoft Word, just because this is what the publishers are working with. You want to make sure you're all working off this, the most final document. And again, it just helps me to process my thoughts before sharing them with the author, because the author might get upset, offended, jump the gun, or again, try to explain something away where I want to see for myself. I don't want them to kind of ruin something for me. If maybe it's not clear here, but it's clearer there, then that will help me to note to the author, okay, let's make sure in chapter 3, this is made clear versus waiting all the way to the end for this point to be clarified. So again, these are just some, tips that can really help your editor, whether in-house or when you have hired to work through your book. If you can have it as polished as possible, not just in the grammar and punctuation, but also in how it's formatted, this is going to be really, really helpful for you. Again, finished books, best-selling books, ebooks, print books, anything where you can physically read and see how things are formatted is a great resource. In addition to, of course, taking classes and attending conferences. Thank you all, as always, for your time and attention. If you have any questions or comments about what I've talked about, please don't hesitate to leave me a comment below, and I'll see you next time.